Good afternoon. Welcome to session 2 of the iDEA Growth Power Lunch Summit. My name is Louisa Woods. I am the Vice President of Marketing for the Gaming Division at Delaware North Gaming and Entertainment. And I'm excited to be here today to talk about the iGaming experience and why other states should be looking into authorizing iGaming and regulating iGaming. Obviously, sports betting is very much front of mind, especially with the kickoff of the NFL season. But quietly in the background, iGaming has become the more profitable form of digital gaming here in the US. That may be a surprise to some. It's not a huge surprise to me. Even though it's only available right now in half a dozen states. And so one of the things that, that we all wanted to get together today and talk about is what's next for iGaming. Before I introduce my esteemed panelists, I have a couple of housekeeping items. If any attendees have questions, you can add them using the Q&A function in Zoom. And if there's time at the end of the panel, we'll try and address them for you. A recording of today's webinar will be emailed to all attendees, so you can revisit at your leisure. And we would love it if you let iDEA and GeoComply know what other topics you'd like us to highlight in future programs. So we'll be sending a follow-up survey and would love to get your feedback on that. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our 3 panelists. Actually, I'll let them introduce themselves. They have all been at the forefront of this discussion around, the expansion of iGaming, and they bring really a unique perspective. They're all working in states that have taken the leap into legal iGaming, as do I. We have operations in West Virginia where iGaming has been legalized. First of all, we have Laura Byrd. Would you like to introduce yourself, Laura?
Sure. Thank you, Louisa. Hello, everybody. My name is Laura Byrd. I am currently, my title's been updated since the slide was done, but I'm currently the U.S. Regulatory Affairs and Compliance Director for 888 US. Acutely relevant to our panel today. I previously was with the Pennsylvania Gaming Control Board for almost 11 years, where I was in the Chief Counsel's Office. And when gaming expansion passed in Pennsylvania in 2017, I was the head of our Regulatory Affairs Department and responsible for coordinating and drafting, among other areas of gaming expansion, sports wagering and internet gaming.
Thanks, Laura. And also Executive Director Henry Williams. Can you introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Henry Williams, and I'm the Executive Director of the Michigan Gaming Control Board. I've been with the Gaming Control Board for over 21 years. I started with our organization as a regulation officer in our enforcement unit in our commercial casinos. I moved to become the manager of our employee licensing section, which licenses all the occupational licensees who wish to work in the gaming industry. Later, I worked as a deputy director with the Michigan Gaming Control Board. And then I was appointed last May as executive director of the Michigan Gaming Control Board by our governor, Gretchen Whitmer. So here I am, and I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And finally, Senator Curtis Hertel Jr. of the Michigan State Senate.
Thank you so much for having me. I apologize that I'm not on camera. I unfortunately have COVID. I'm feeling much better, but not to a place where I wanted to subject you all to, seeing me unshaven for 3 days. But I appreciate all being on here. I'm the state senator from the 23rd district. I represent the greatest university in the state, Michigan State University, the capital here in Lansing. I grew up in the east side of Detroit, but now make Lansing my home, and that's where I represent here in the state Senate. I am the Democratic lead on the Appropriations Committee here in Michigan, and was the lead negotiator on the Democratic side during the negotiations of the gaming package.
Well, we really appreciate you joining us despite COVID. So thank you for making yourself available for this conversation today.
Happy to do it. Excited to be here.
Great. So wanted to start off with talking about how do states begin the legalization process. I guess, Senator Hertel, I will start with you. What did you find to be kind of the most compelling reasons for pushing to legalize iGaming?
Well, I think a couple things. First of all, you have to remember that we did this process twice. The first time we did this process, it was actually vetoed by the former governor, and then we had to restart the entire process again. I think a couple things were really key to trying to get it done. I think one, it's a great new source of revenue. That's an important part of the prospect. We're always looking for more dollars for our schools, and that was certainly something that was pushed. We had a clamoring out in the community for specifically sports betting, and I think that oftentimes that's the one thing that's interesting, is that iGaming is the number one way to actually get those tax dollars into our system. But sports betting is the one that probably has the most media attention, and the one that our constituents really, I think, are most talking about. So you have to find, I think you have to, having them go together, I think, is incredibly important in that regard. So I think that was the biggest thing. Obviously, our local casinos were pushing for it. We faced lots of challenges along the way, but I think that really the funding structure and the push for sports gaming helped us get iGaming done.
Well, it's interesting that constituents are voting for sports betting with their voices, but voting for iGaming with their dollars, isn't it? What kind of opposing arguments were you hearing when it came to pushing for the legalization of iGaming?
So I think we always face some challenges. We faced some challenges at the beginning of fear from the local communities. The city of Detroit is heavily funded by their three main casinos, and so of concerns that that iGaming would take away from those bricks and mortar gaming. We did a couple things in order to allay those concerns. Well, we required heavy geocaching so that casinos couldn't just change their casinos into an iGaming parlor and avoid paying the local taxes. We did a funding floor, basically, that if the city of Detroit lost funding in this process, that they would be made up from some of the iGaming funds. By the way, the city of Detroit got a pretty good deal there, because COVID actually caused them to have a reduction in funding, and they got a significant portion of money from the state because of that. So the locals were able to benefit there. We had certainly the normal anti-gaming advocates and all those people. We dealt with that. I think that that's becoming less and less in society as people get used to gaming and fantasy football and all the different ways that people are betting nowadays. But we certainly had those challenges and had to fight that back. I think the biggest challenge we had was convincing the first governor, which we failed at. We thought we had an agreement the first time, and I was at Star Wars with my kids when I found out that the bills were vetoed, and got no call beforehand. So it was very, very frustrating that day for all of us who had worked on the package during that lame duck session. We're told that we were good, got all the stakeholders in agreement, and then the governor vetoed it without talking to any of us. I turned my phone off and watched the rest of the movie with my kids, and then went back to work. But the big issue that he pointed to, and what the next governor was rightfully concerned about that we had to prove was wrong, was a fear in the loss of lottery dollars. And so that I think was the biggest obstacle that we had, was trying to convince people that if you had the right tax structure, that this gaming was added entertainment value, that lottery players are different necessarily than casino players. And I think what has happened through iGaming has proven that. We have not seen a loss in our iLottery dollars or our physical lottery dollars. In fact, lottery dollars have gone up, partially probably because of the pandemic. But also, so we saw those dollars go up. And really, we created a new whole revenue source for schools. But you have to remember, we were one of the early adopters, so those fears were very, very much out there that time, and it led us to, I think, a very robust tax structure on the casinos, and which is true. Michigan has pretty high fare, I would say, because they're still making a pretty darn good profit. But we have a high tax environment for the casinos and the iGaming vendors, and that I think was pretty important. So really, those I think were all the major challenges that we faced, and they were reflected in negotiations. And I think, in all honesty, at the end of the day, the only stakeholders that were left opposed to the bill were traditional anti-gaming advocates that I think have been weakened in states like ours, where it's pretty hard to say that you don't want gaming when I think I am currently the farthest in Michigan you can be from a casino, and I'm 45 minutes away from it. So it becomes very hard to actually make that kind of argument when the state literally has casinos in pretty much in less than an hour drive of almost any place you can go in the state.
It is the process, obviously, of getting from bill to law has lots of twists and turns and a lot of stakeholders involved. You know, you've kind of touched on a little bit of it. Other highlights in finally getting across the finish line?
Well, there are a ton of good stories when it comes to getting across the finish line. I could say that for sure. I don't know. I think I'm saving some of them for my book for some of the negotiations. We also face a challenge from the horse racing industry, by the way, who was concerned about that. They ended up getting advanced deposit wagering as part of all that, which actually turned out in the pandemic was a pretty good benefit to myself, actually, because I mean, there was no sports, and that was actually a version of entertainment in the middle of the pandemic. It's helped that industry at least limp along here in Michigan. But I would say that the hardest thing for everybody was keeping everybody in the room and long enough. And so no offense to any lawyers on the phone, but getting the lawyers to stop talking, because we sat in for a very long time in negotiations, and the perfect is the enemy of the good. And I think a lot of times we were having discussions, and finally I thought, listen, I know that there are plenty of people at this table that are getting billed by the hour, but we're voting in 3 hours, and so we need to let the drafter actually draft. So I think that was one of the major challenges towards the end, was everybody trying to dot the i's. The other thing that happened that I think most people don't even know about was that we originally passed the bill and then had to change it because there was the fiscal agency believed, and going back and forth now, I think that was probably misbelieved, but believed that there was an error that would have cost the state significant portions of money. So we actually had to renegotiate language at 2 o'clock in the morning. So I had Treasury's lobbyists, my chief of staff, somebody from the governor's office, somebody from gaming control, all in a room at 2 o'clock in the morning, working with a bunch of lawyers, trying to figure out how we were going to fix a problem that turns out may or may not have been. And we rewrote an entire piece of legislation overnight. and still got it passed the next day. So really, those people deserve a lot of the credit. At the end of the day, my name gets attached to it, but there were a lot of great people that spent a ton of time redoing the work over and over again to make sure we got it right. And so I'm very proud of the entire team that we had that night.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the number of people involved in coming together and getting aligned always amazes me. Obviously, of course, once the bill becomes law, then you have to actually put all of the regulations in place. Director Williams, can you talk to us about, you have a law, what's next? How do you approach this process? Where do you look for guidelines, and what's next?
Yes. First, I must say you have to have progressive and forward-thinking leaders like Senator Hertel. You have to have people involved that, because gaming is new, iGaming is new, right? And so it's scary. You can't touch it like you can touch a brick and mortar casino. So people are naturally apprehensive about a new industry. But you have to have individuals like Senator Hertel and Brent Iden who can go to their colleagues and put a law together and get everyone on board. And truly, it takes everyone. I mean, you need it. We here in Michigan, of course, we needed the commercial casinos on board. We needed the tribes on board. We needed the public to be on board. All the different lobbyists and all the different stakeholders and interest groups. And so I think it really took for all of us to listen to each other. Let's see what works best for the state of Michigan, ensuring that the law had the teeth it needed for a regulator like myself to ensure there's things in the law that we can regulate the industry. Drafting our administrative rules, ensuring that we had everyone involved, letting them see what we had drafted, taking their ideas, going back to the table, and just making sure we put the best product forward. I think that was very important for the state of Michigan and everyone involved.
Now, did you look at other states like New Jersey and Pennsylvania for a model when you were looking to lay out the regulations? And were you picking and choosing from different jurisdictions, or how were you approaching that?
Absolutely. Indiana, New Jersey, Pennsylvania. Yes, we looked at a number of other jurisdictions. And we also ensured that we sent our staff out. I would encourage any other jurisdiction, don't be afraid to reach out. Here in Michigan, call us, come talk to us, come see how we're doing it. Any way that we can help, we are available. I think some people or jurisdictions try to recreate the wheel, but it's already out there, and we sent staff across the United States to different jurisdictions. We went to different trainings. UNLV had a lot of great trainings in Las Vegas for sports betting, iGaming, anywhere where we can get information from, we went there. We weren't afraid to pick up the telephone. We weren't afraid to call and go out and visit, So I would say, please ensure you have some funding in place to send your staff out to gather the information you're going to need. Because like Senator Hertel has said, we worked hand in hand with them, and any information they needed that we had that we could provide, we provided it.
Now, Laura, you bring a unique perspective because, first of all, you were operating as a regulator, instrumental in launching iGaming in Pennsylvania, but now you're working with one of the leading global operators. And I love that you kind of bring those two perspectives. Can you share with us, as a regulator in Pennsylvania, what were some of the things that you were working on to put regulations in place?
Sure. So in Pennsylvania, we started while the legislation was bouncing around to different committees and whatnot. We started doing, as Director Williams said, a lot of education with our staff, because it's a new area of gaming and has a lot of elements that your land-based staff is unfamiliar with. So in addition to the types of trainings or CLEs or whatnot that staff did, we also made a concerted effort and brought a lot of the industry into the Pennsylvania Gaming Control Board for education and Q&A sessions. Companies like my own 888 came who had been in the space either in New Jersey and the smaller jurisdictions in the US or in Europe to tell us what we should be focused on or what would be important to ensure a successful market. So prior to that law passing, when we got the directive from the legislature to roll out those regulations and implement the gaming as fast as possible, we had done a lot of the legwork, right? We had taught ourselves, we had outlined what we wanted to do for regulations, we had prioritized what elements needed to get out there first. Obviously, for example, any of the applications or licensing work. So when it came time to actually draft the meat and bones of doing the regulations and circulating those around departments, we had a lot already in place and ready to go. We also, as Director Williams said, turn to other jurisdictions. There is no need to reinvent the wheel. We had New Jersey, our neighbor, that had already implemented and had been operating iGaming for a couple of years. We heavily relied not just on their regulations that we could find online, but their staff was extremely helpful. And I know that Pennsylvania, although I'm not there, I know that their staff, I can speak for them, would be extremely helpful and open to assisting future jurisdictions that want to enter into the iGaming space.
So I guess a two-part question, you know, for both the regulators on the call, how do you find that regulating iGaming is different than regulating land-based gaming operations? And what surprised you about the differences and about operating or regulating iGaming? We'll start with you, Laura.
Okay. I mean, so the differences are the skill set. The iGaming space has a lot of technical elements that aren't present in the land-based world. So learning what those are and how to regulate them efficiently is a hurdle. But also a difference that we noted between land-based and the online world is the extent of the audit trail and records that are necessary in order to have a good, thorough, from a regulator perspective, a good, thorough understanding and insight into the security of the system, to the transactions, to any variance reports. I mean, there's a lot of different audit trails and records that need to be maintained and updated in real time that aren't necessarily there in the land-based space. And that goes to, right, learning a new skill set. I'll let Director Williams talk about his experience in the difference between land-based and iGaming worlds.
Yeah, Laura, I think you're absolutely correct. I mean, with the land-based casinos versus iGaming, of course, you know, physical buildings versus virtual, right? And whoever knew anything about geofencing, like what the heck is that? You go to a casino, you know, you only can gamble in that property, right? At that location. So this whole geofencing and geolocation and all those wonderful things to prevent people from wagering outside of the state of Michigan. And, you know, that was a totally new, total different, you know, mindset. Of course, some of the things are similar as far as licensing the companies. You know, those things were the same. You license a company the same way if they're on the internet versus if it's a brick and mortar location. But yes, it's really a skill set in hiring the staff that you need to regulate that virtual space, the internet gaming, all the controls that need to be in place to protect the citizens, their information, their credit cards, know your customers, and all those things, internal controls that needs to be in place are different from some of the things you would have in a brick and mortar land-based casino. So it's very much about educating staff, ensuring that they understand the difference between the gaming acts, because like here in Michigan, we operated under one gaming act for years that regulated the casinos. And then here comes internet sports betting and the lawful sports betting act. So now there's two more acts, in educating your staff not to use, the same act for the land base that you would use against the internet gaming companies, right? And so just in educating your staff that, nope, that's land based, you need to go read the other act, because that may not apply to internet gaming. And so continually trying to educate your staff, meeting with the stakeholders, so these casinos will always come up with something new that they would like to try. And you don't want to be too burdensome on the casinos. So it's always talking it through, really. What is it you're trying to do? And how does that fit inside the Gaming Act in our administrative rules and internal controls? So some similarities, but a lot of differences.
Yeah, I
And I
know
think
from the
kind of,
operators.
sorry,
Go ahead.
I was going to say kind of to add on to what Director Williams said is, and I don't know if it was a surprise to me as a regulator, but a clear difference to me was the speed and diversity of the innovation in the online space. Not that our land-based casinos don't try new things or try new systems or whatnot, but the speed with which that happens and the frequency with which that happens in the online space is a lot different than what our land-based counterparts do. And keeping the staff educated and up to date on possible, you can't account for everything. You can't, train everybody on crypto and NFTs fast enough for the industry to want to be able to implement them. But that speed and diversity of innovation is a big difference between the online and the land-based space.
So true. Senator Hertel, surprises since regulating iGaming?
Interesting surprises. I certainly we took in more revenue than we thought we were going to, which is obviously a positive surprise. What's interesting is that I think for a lot of us, we thought I think the clamoring for sports betting was high enough that some people thought. I actually have always known that sports betting is sort of a loss leader in most casinos in Vegas, but but I'm sort of a nerd on these kinds of things. But I think a lot of people thought that sports gaming would be the one that really propelled this to a lot of the revenue, and that's really not the case. I mean, the iGaming really is what was the giant leap in what our estimates were. I think that the fact that everyone was wrong, that we proved everybody wrong on the lottery numbers, and the lottery numbers actually went up. The other thing that I think is important to remember in all this is to make sure when you're selling this, that the funding structures are going to things you can celebrate. So like, for example, part of our act goes to increase problem gambling awareness and to provide higher levels of intervention and help for people. That was something that I think is obviously needed to go back after those that are be concerned about that. But we also included more money for schools, more money for localities. But one thing the thing I'm most proud of that we're able to negotiate was a fund to pay for firefighters who get cancer in the line of duty. So firefighters are more likely to get cancer because of the chemicals that they actually come in contact with. There was a fund created, but there was no permanent fund source. And so now, somebody goes and bets on the Lions or you know, and we lose a lot. So that's, you know, or, you know, plays one of the iGaming devices. And a portion of that actual funding goes directly to those families of firefighters that get cancer. And I think that made it much harder for people to attack and feel bad about, you know, feel bad about it. And I think that actually helped quite a bit. And it's also, you know, doing the right thing. So I think that's an important thing too. When you get your act, besides making it try to find interesting partners. So at the end of the day, we had the school groups in favor of iGaming. You know, we had firefighters organization, the firefighters union, and firefighters across the state, you know, helping get it done. And so I think that's helpful, I think, in trying to actually building your partnerships beyond what your normal partnerships would be. Just, you know, I mean, nobody feels bad for a casino, right? You print money. I mean, I think only Donald Trump's the only person I know who lost money running a casino. But I think for everybody else, I think that it makes sense that we actually can try to bring in other partners. And I think that was probably one of the reasons why we were most successful.
It is, you know, as a member of the gaming community, you know, I think we all feel proud about the great work that is done with the funds that we generate in our industry. So let's move on to talking about the revenue opportunity for states. So Director Williams, how has iGaming performed from a revenue perspective? Let's talk about the case in Michigan.
As Senator Hertel has said, no one anticipated the amount of revenue that iGaming would generate. I think our fiscal analysis, we anticipated 18 million a year in tax revenue from iGaming. We're over 200 million a year. No way we could have anticipated that. The revenue that comes in from iGaming is really remarkable, and the public interest is still there. You know, we thought it would fall off, but it hasn't. I know for a fact in 2022, this year, it's going to be higher than 2021. You know, we're going to approach close to $250 million revenue and tax revenue.
And by comparison, sports betting is generating.
Sports betting generate less only because now the handle is high in sports. You're thinking about 4 billion in, you know, in the handle. However, the actual tax revenue that comes from sports betting is less only because of the free bet that sports betting is allowed. So they can have unlimited amounts of free bet that they can deduct. So once they deduct all the free bet, then of course it reduces the revenue, the tax revenue that the state could actually collect, which is different from iGaming. iGaming is limited. There's only so much of it they can deduct. And so the revenue received from iGaming is much higher.
And so, you know, Senator Hertel, you mentioned earlier that there was some concern around a potential negative impact on the state's online lottery. So that has not played out with iGaming?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
The question was, you had mentioned that there was some concern about a potential negative impact on the state's online lottery. You mentioned it relative to sports betting, but has that played out at all with iGaming?
No, our lottery revenues are up. So I mean, actually, again, I think one thing I'd say is that oftentimes these are different populations that are playing different games. People that play the lottery traditionally are lottery players. The other thing is that, you know, I mean, and I'd like to see a non-COVID year, obviously a full year of that. But I would say that people were stuck at home a lot looking for entertainment and weren't able to do a lot of other things. So I think gaming options it was a pretty good year for gaming options and for lottery. But our first year calculations show that both grew. It was not, neither took away from each other.
Yeah, and I think that, you know, there's always the opportunity to treat these as extensions of each other. You know, Director Williams, you were just talking about the deductions in free play and the impact on revenues. Laura, when you're drafting rules as a regulator, how much are you thinking about the impact on potential revenues?
There's very little, Director Williams can probably agree that the legislation leaves very little room for much that a regulatory agency can do that will seriously affect revenue, right? They prescribe the taxes, they're going to prescribe the licensing fees or operating fees. There, you know, in terms of market access, whether or not there needs to be a partnership with a land-based, or you can come in on your own as a mobile operator, a lot of that is already set out in the legislation. And there's not too much that a regulatory agency can do outside of facilitating ease of the administrative portion of getting things filed and settled and systems approved. But I will say that in my time as a regulator, we are always conscious of that balance, right, between wanting to support a robust and successful industry within the framework of the legislative parameters, and also ensuring that the industry was operating with the utmost integrity, and that we also weren't picking favorites. I know that was, maybe I'm revealing something, but that was a concern of us in Pennsylvania, that if a certain regulation, even if it was just a filing deadline, was going to negatively impact or somehow sway the market towards one type of operator over another, we didn't see that as being within our purview of what we were supposed to do. So we considered those elements, but there wasn't too much that we could do as regulators to severely affect them.
You think, you know, speaking to other states that are considering introducing iGaming regulation, that there are legislative choices that could hamper their potential revenue growth that they should be aware of, or that they should be considering?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, tax rates and operating fees and licensing fees, because they vary greatly amongst the jurisdictions. And I think we all understand why. There's different political concerns or just on the ground concerns, for instance, maybe where those, as Senator Hertel was speaking of, where those tax dollars are allocated. I think if you are going to have an eye towards launching and maintaining a successful iGaming market, elements to consider are an expedited licensing process. And you can do that in many forms. You can have conditional or provisional licenses. You can accept licensing decisions from other jurisdictions within the US. You can also use the multi-jurisdictional form or implement that in some way, shape, or form to facilitate and ease the burden that is filing all of the applications that are necessary. Another element that I think is important for legislators to consider is the launch rollout, whether or not you intend to have a universal launch for all of the applicants, or roll that out. And if you're going to roll it out in a tiered way, how would you determine how to do that, right? Is it who's paired with a land base, if that's necessary, or is it somebody who is already licensed in maybe several other US jurisdictions? All of those things affect, from an operator perspective, how attractive a market looks to us, and the resources and bandwidth that we have to allocate in order to not just enter, but maintain a successful operation in the state.
I think there's always a balance between optimizing revenues and ensuring that you're protecting public interest. So let's talk a little bit about, you know, there was a lot of concern at the beginning about protecting consumers. So let's talk about that a little bit. Senator Hertel, what should states that don't have legal regulated iGaming be concerned about in terms of consumers often unknowingly playing on illegal unregulated iGaming sites, because it can be very difficult for them to tell, particularly people who are not immersed, as everyone on this panel is every day.
Well, I think it's important for everybody to remember is that gaming is happening regardless of whether we legalize it or not. It's happening in unregulated ways, which means that our citizens are getting oftentimes taken advantage of. There are games that are not regulated, so they're unfair. There's no guarantee the person can even get the money they put in back. Oftentimes, information that is given to those companies is compromised in other ways. You're dealing with somebody who's willing to operate illegally. Obviously, they're willing to do illegal things with your information you give them as well. So it increases the threats of identity theft and all those things. Beyond that, there's no limitation on the ages. So there's no need to prove that. So you have children that are actually using those things. And beyond the fact that you're missing out on tons of tax dollars that can actually be done for the public good as well. So by not legalizing it, all the bad things that come with gaming, you're already getting. I mean, I think that's important. What people have to remember, you're getting still people are, people always bring up people with gambling addictions. I can tell you that that's a serious concern. I can also tell you that somebody with a gambling addiction doesn't have any problem finding a place to gamble in America. They don't need to get on a flight. They have a phone sitting in their hand. They could find some way to gamble if they wanted to. It's not hard. So, I mean, I bet on the Super Bowl every single year. I probably shouldn't say this on a recorded thing, but it's true. I bet on the Super Bowl every single year. Well before there was a legal way to do it. So people are gaming. They're finding ways to gamble. They're using those dollars for that, and so you have a choice in the state. You can be part of the solution of actually regulating a system, making it fair for customers, making it so that they know they're going to get paid out, making sure that their information's protected, making sure that minors aren't getting a hold of this, and actually getting the tax revenue. Or you can let mobsters and people overseas and other people take advantage of your citizens. I think that it's clear what the better option is, which is why I'm proud that Michigan did what it did. At the end of the day, I think our citizens are better protected. I'm sure, I'm 100% sure they're gaming somewhat more, but they're doing so in a safe and legal environment.
Every customer identified, every wager tracked. Laura, what are operators like 888 doing to address the issues that Senator Hurdle just mentioned? Responsible gaming, integrity of the games, verification of the customers.
I mean, so obviously 888 has been in the online gaming space for over a decade. So we have the benefit of learning over that time what works and what doesn't, both in the US and in Europe. So we have the ability with our global platform to identify worldwide trends and or local trends, and then implement internal systems, according to our risk assessment, and then according to whatever the regulatory stricture might be in that particular jurisdiction. I think our experience in that area benefits us in being able to see what works. We're a mature operator in that sense. I think at large, operators need to, not only follow the regulations that are put in place by the various jurisdictions, but treat those regulations as the starting point in the base, as opposed to the bare minimum. There's always things that you can implement and flags that you can put in your system to ensure the integrity of gaming and to protect our consumers, who we spend a lot of money to attract consumers to our product, and it behooves us to make sure that we have an upstanding product in place that protects not just our consumers, but the public at large.
Great answer. Director Williams, with, the thing about iGaming is that it is every wager tracked. With access to all of that data and information, what have you and your team found to be the most helpful in understanding how to protect consumers in terms of the data that you're receiving?
I would have to say is looking at the citizens that's online wagering and looking at how often they're taking advantage of the opportunities to protect themselves as far as limiting their time on the sites, limiting how much money they spend. It helps our organization look more at responsible gaming. Just recently, this past budget that was recently passed by our legislature, where we asked for $3 million for responsible gaming messaging. The first time we've ever asked for this type of funding in our budget, but we were able to see that the gaming industry was spending $500 million on advertising to the citizens in the state of Michigan. And so we were able to take that information back to the legislature and say, hey, we need some assistance here. We need to provide our citizens with responsible gaming messaging. And we requested $3 million and they approved us for $3 million. You know, so again, great thank you to Senator Hertel and his colleagues for understanding what the citizens of this state needs and helping them protect themselves from, you know, creating or starting a habit they really can't afford. You know, so for us to be able to look at that data to see how many people are signing out from each platform versus them coming to the state of Michigan to the Gaming Control Board and signing out, you know, we're in the hundreds, but they're signing out online in the thousands. You know, so just being able to track that type of information or gather that type of information from the platform operators.
Tremendous. We're running a little low on time. So as we wrap things up, I feel like you've all made a really great case for, you know, not only the reasons to expand into iGaming, but the fact that it is additive to the gaming business as a whole. You know, it's can be done in a safe and responsible way. And I'm really excited about the progress we've seen in terms of shining a light on responsible gaming. Just a couple of questions, sort of big picture before we wrap. Laura, from your perspective, what does the future of iGaming look like in the US with about a half a dozen states having regulated at this point?
Well, obviously, it's going to expand. I think that with so many states now coming on board with mobile sports wagering, regulators and the public and legislators are going to become more comfortable with the tech that's involved with an online gaming product. And with that, seeing the success of states like Michigan in terms of the revenue that they can provide to their citizens and to the state through legalized iGaming. So that's the number one thing, that it expands. On a more micro level, as I said earlier, there's a ton of innovation that moves fast in the online space. I think areas in terms of new forms of payment, I think I mentioned earlier with cryptos and NFTs and different things, there's going to be movement in that space as a newer generation is introduced to gaming, and they're used to using different forms of payment for their entertainment. I think also there's going to be a big effort to improve and make the user experience more seamless, right? And that can come in many different areas. It can come just in cross-product integration. It can come in more usage of universal accounts and universal wallets across products or across jurisdictions. But just making the online gaming experience more user-friendly, seamless, and a little less cumbersome for our patrons is what I see coming ahead.
Absolutely. Senator Hertel, you talked to us about how you got this bill made into law. What advice would you give to lawmakers in other states who are looking to sponsor iGaming legislation?
Well, I think a couple things. first of all, you know, these are always fun, especially as I get to the end of my term, because I'm term limited out. So, you know, I get to the end of this, so you become the more senior person in a lot of these rooms. So, but Michigan's a short term limit state, so my entire career is only 8 years in the Senate. Although if you ask my kids, it's been a long 8 years. I would say that my biggest advice is a couple things. One, gaming is not a partisan issue, and so don't treat it like that. Brant Iden and I worked together on this package. We probably are two of the leaders on the political sides of our parties as well. We're able to make strong points for each side. Brant was from a targeted seat. I was the campaign chair for the caucus. We never made this political. We worked together. We found interesting coalitions, and we were able to get it done because we put partisanship aside. I think that's a big part of it. It's really a success at this point of getting any legislation passed in states where you need to work with both sides of the aisle. The other thing I would say is build broad coalitions. I mean, like I said, you know, getting funding from the firefighters, getting funding for schools, getting funding for cities. All of a sudden, it wasn't just a bunch of gaming lobbyists sitting out in the lobby. It was everybody else as well. And some of those groups are harder to say no to. So that was, I think, a big part of it was building a bigger and better coalition. And I think the other thing is that your citizens want this. And we've proven that in Michigan, that citizens want these things. There were always going to be naysayers. There are always going to be people that push to try to prevent innovation. But at the end of the day, citizens have voted with their dollars and showed they wanted this in Michigan. And so I think that not one person in the legislature was voted out of office because they voted for iGaming. And in Michigan, we have just about every kind of district you could look for. We have rural, we have urban, we have suburban, we got Republican seats, we got Democratic seats, we have marginal seats. We have areas with very high religious groups. Not one person who voted for iGaming, and a clear majority of both bodies did, experienced any negative pushback in terms of their election. And so I think that's important to remember as well, that you can do this and you can feel good that at the end of the day, your citizens are going to support it.
A great story of creating alignment both across the aisle and from so many stakeholders, you know, finding wins for so many different stakeholders in this process. Director Williams, from your perspective, what opportunities are there for regulators in other states to learn from Michigan's iGaming success?
This is going to be a little biased, but I'm going to advise any jurisdiction that's looking to do iGaming in your state. I would say copy Michigan's law. You know, go to our website, michigan.gov/MGCB, and take a look at the law that Michigan passed. There's a lot of good information in there that will be helpful in drafting your law and the items and things you need to protect the citizens. I will also say, take a copy of our administrative rules. They're online as well, and how we regulate the industry. I believe that ensuring that you have infrastructure in place before you launch iGaming is so important to have. You know, during COVID, we had the opportunity to really avail ourselves to all our staff. But of course, you can't do that, you know, because the casinos are now back open, the market is open. And I would just say that, you know, sit down with all your stakeholders, your senators, your state reps, you know, if you have tribes in your state that you need to communicate with your land-based casinos, and I just come to the table, have an open forum discussion. You know, no one's going to get everything they want out of this. You know, I think Senator Hertel is absolutely correct when he says that the funding that comes in from iGaming and how those funds are distributed across other industries. You know, we have part of our funding that goes to our horse racing. You know, here soon, part of that will go to support our charities in our state for our Millionaire Party. So we're going to use iGaming funds to fund that operation. So as many stakeholders as you can bring to the table and help support internet gaming and internet sports betting, I think you'll be more successful. But also call us. We're here to help. Don't reinvent the wheel. Anything we can do to assist. Send your regulators here, send your auditors here, and send your state reps and your senators here. And we'll be more than happy to sit down and talk about what we're doing here in Michigan.
Fantastic, thank you. I think we have time for one quick question. Senator Hurdle, I see this one coming in for you. Most specifically, how did you get casinos on board with iGaming? And how has iGaming affected their land-based businesses?
So for us, it was pretty simple. In order to get a iGaming license, you need to be partnered with a casino. So it was really they were the ones pushing for it because you had to have that relationship in order to make it work. So whether it's a tribe or whether it's a tribal casino or one of our Detroit casinos that are in our constitution, we have both those. The partnership had to be there. So I think that's, you know, the key there was making that happen. It's probably a pretty simple answer in that regard.
Fantastic. I think we're just about out of time. I want to, first of all, thank our esteemed panelists. This was a great conversation. I really enjoyed all your comments. Thanks to iDEA Growth and GeoComply for hosting, for allowing me to participate today. And I would like to remind everyone to come back and join us again tomorrow for part 3. And we're going to be talking about, I think, M&A forecast for 2023. A great panel that's been put together, same time tomorrow. So hope you will all be able to join us then. And thanks to all our listeners for taking time out of your day today.